5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. All engine running. Liftoff. We have a liftoff.
Welcome, and thanks for joining us today. Today I'd like to share with you a hidden gem, one that's nestled at the foot of Mount Baldy in a lush meadow. It's so tucked away that unless you had directions or knew the way, you wouldn't know it exists. I am referring to 31 Mile Ranch, which is a privately owned historic site and rental property. As you enter the property, you are greeted by a striking Duch-colonial barn set against the backdrop of a sun-soaked valley and a modern cabin with all the high-tech amenities you could need. I had the pleasure of staying on the site and was fortunate to be able to speak to the landowner, who provided us with a wealth of information about the property's history and its potential future. 31 Mile Ranch has a sordid tale, complete with debutants, cowboys, and heartbreak. One that's well documented in the local newspaper and by historical records that the property owners have kept and passed down as a family heirloom. I was fortunate to be granted unprecedented access to these documents and look forward to sharing the story of 31 Mile Ranch. The first mineral rights records on the property date back to a claim that was made all the way back in 1883. The original settlers continued to renew their mineral rights until 1942, but no major mining operation was ever developed on the land. Rather, a 600-acre plot of land was homesteaded by Charles V. Corliss on June 16, 1921. To the best of recollections, the two-bedroom log house that stands today was built in the 1880s by the original mineral rights owners. A large 5-bedroom log house was built in the early 1900s by ranchers who leased the area from the government. The architect who built the windmill and house was an artist and builder from Colorado Springs named Benjamin Liftowski. The windmill that we see today is all original except for one replaced blade. It once pumped water into a tank inside the attic of the log house, supplying it with running water. The attic of the home used sawdust as insulation, and unfortunately, in 1950, a hot stovepipe caught the sawdust on fire and the house burnt to the ground. Today, we can still see remnants of the stove that caused the fire amongst the foundations of the home. Before the house burnt in 1925, Barbara Monell-Glaze purchased the ranch from Charles Corliss and constructed the 5-bedroom log house. Barbara was known to be a very social lady who held dance parties once a month on the top floor of her barn. Barbara's father, Ambrose Monell, was a very wealthy man, as he was the president of the International Nickel Co. and director of several important banks. Her father afforded her a lavish lifestyle with $1,000 a month allowance, which in today's currency would equate to $15,000 a month. But Barbara shunned the glitz and glamour of her father's lifestyle in New York City. She was a self-described horsewoman, hence why she made her home at 31 Mile Ranch. Her love of horses was a lifelong passion. She had won many ribbons in both the Western and Southern horse circuits. She described it as her favorite pastime. However, others said it was a full-time love affair. Before becoming an accomplished equestrian, when Barbara was only 16 years old, she completed a 2-mile swim in Newport, astonishing the doubt-filled Newport elite and her family. Though she was not all grit and spit, and occasionally used her wealth to indulge her decadent side. For example, when she was not enjoying her horses, she was known to drive around the county in her Rolls-Royce convertible. And before moving to the ranch, she lived in an exclusive Colorado Springs resort, the Broadmoor, but more on that later. While frequenting the local rodeo, she in passing met Kenneth Glaze, who was a rancher and rodeo performer. But they were not properly introduced until she needed a bridle for a horse repaired and found herself in Colorado Springs at Kenneth's harness shop. During this exchange, she discovered that Kenneth was an expert horseman and romance bloomed rapidly. Interestingly, this was not the first time she found herself in his shop, Before moving to Colorado Springs, Barbara visited and brought her dogs with her, not realizing her dogs were required to be on leash in the city of Colorado Springs. And as a result, she found herself in Kenneth's shop. Their chance encounters were almost serendipitous, as if they were a match made in the heavens. The local paper published a lengthy description of Kenneth, saying he was a cowpuncher, Wild West performer, and harness shop proprietor. They went on to say he was the picture of physical perfection, 6 feet and 1/4 inches, weighing 176 pounds. He is of the type that would fit well in a ranch picture. He is of the great breed of Westerners. Kenneth was only 13 years old when he moved from Illinois to Colorado with his parents. He rode the ranges of South Park County for 7 years until he decided to drive his herd of horses 66 miles away to Colorado Springs, where he sold the horses and used the proceeds to purchase his harness shop. And this is where he remained for another 3 months before meeting Barbara Monell. For a time, the couple resided in a modest first-floor apartment in Colorado Springs. The Colorado Springs Gazette peered its nose down on Barbara by saying she had undergone a metamorphosis from gilded lobbies and refined drawing rooms to a 3-bedroom apartment and preparing her own meals with only the grace a newlywed can muster. However, their long-term plan was to wait until spring and move to a ranch in southwestern Colorado. As Kenneth put it, he was enthusiastic over the prospect of a free and untrammeled life in the open. Their relationship was watched closely by the residents of the fashionable and high-end community, the Broadmoor. This is because before moving into their simple Nevada street apartment, Barbara lived in the Broadmoor, where suitors fell upon themselves to catch her eye. She only stayed for 4 months at this posh location, and her quick departure led to all sorts of speculation. However, the stay was always intended to be short-lived, as she was recovering from a surgery that she had undergone that fall. At the recommendation of her mother, she decided to recover in Colorado. However, to her mother's dismay, she loved the area so much that she decided to stay permanently. On February 21st, 1928, the couple was married, 5 weeks after having purchased the bridle from Kenneth's shop and 3 years after Barbara having arrived in Colorado. He was 27 and she was 23. They were said to have been madly in love and to have had a romance that bloomed rapidly. The Colorado Springs Gazette and Telegraph reported that their relationship was love at first sight between one of New York's best-known debutantes, an heiress to millions, and a bronzed giant cowboy of Colorado Springs. They went on to say that it culminated in a wedding that gave Gotham something to gasp over. The ceremony was shrouded in secrecy, and only close family members attended the small gathering in the Monell home. Barbara intentionally registered for their marriage license using her Colorado Springs address rather than her New York City address to avoid raising media attention ahead of the ceremony. It took the local paper a full 10 days before they realized and reported on this uncommon marriage. Barbara's father had little to say regarding her daughter's choice of husband, but he did deliver an ultimatum to her on her wedding day, reportedly saying if she were to marry again, he would disown her. Shortly after their marriage, a local man named Franklin Nash recalled Barbara negotiating with her father, W. Nash, to purchase 6 head of registered Hereford cows. According to Franklin, Barbara did not want her husband to know she was purchasing the cows. That same year, in 1929, they built the Gambrel Roof Barn, which stands nearly 100 years after its construction. I speculate that the purchase of the cows was an attempt to make the construction of the barn a necessity. Regardless, Barbara's ranch was very elaborate, especially for the interwar period and for this area of Colorado. This is because most ranchers of the era could not afford an investment of this scale. In a 1999 interview, local woman Ruby Ankrum Worley spoke about her times on the ranch when she was 20 years old. Ruby had resided in Fremont County since 1931 and recalled when Barbara Glaze moved to the house on what was called Skyline Ranch at the time, or Green Mountain Ranch, depending who you were talking to. Ruby attended Barbara's housewarming party in 1934. During the party, one guest spilled a glass of wine on another. Without hesitation, Barbara took them to her closet and told the wine-soaked guests to choose any dress they like. It was a gift to the guest. However, Barbara had little need for the multitude of fancy dresses that she owned. Ruby stated that Barbara preferred to wear trousers and men's-styled lace shoes. She elaborated by saying, in the 1930s, women always wore long dresses, so Barbara Glaze was quite the gossip amongst the local women. Nearby newspapers reported on the housewarming party, saying, the beautiful home of Mrs. Barbara Monell-Glaze. The home, built of logs, recently completed and opened at a housewarming, to which many Canyon City people were invited. The home contains 11 rooms and 3 baths. A 2-car garage in the basement houses her Rolls-Royce and Auburn cars. In other words, this house sported the size and amenities that were not common in most American homes at that time. 18 to 20 years after its construction, in the 1950s, it was common to see homes of this size with attached garages. I suppose Barbara had architectural tastes that were ahead of her time. The home she built was in sharp contrast to the others in Guffey, Colorado. It was described by the paper as the finest of its kind in the state. She made a real splash with the locals by bringing her own breed of Park Avenue flair to southern Colorado. The article went on to describe an immense living room with 2 fireplaces, plush leather seats, and built-in bookshelves. The walls were lined with the finest beads and animal skins. But this was not what Barbara chose to showcase during the interview. She led the reporters to the front entrance, where just outside sat her dog kennels, and an opportunity to share with the community another one of her hobbies, raising huskies or sled dogs. The housewarming party was just the first of a regular series of open houses, or what we would call today house parties. Residents from the area were said to dance the night away and eat what they called a midnight lunch. Or in other words, they partied all night and had a late night meal. Barbara's party dress was described as Canyon City trousers, a shirt open at the neck, Indian moccasins, and a jaunty tam, or what we would call today a beret. Her close friends would joke that she was just a regular guy. Unfortunately, the romance and good times did not last, and they were divorced in 1931. The headlines read, "Marriage of heiress and harness maker may end in divorce court." However, to get a divorce at this time, it was not that easy, especially for a woman. This is because the accuser was required to prove they had grounds for divorce, which in most cases came down to a case of he said, she said. There was no guarantee that the courts would grant a divorce. It's no wonder so many people who faced a lengthy, arduous, and uncertain divorce opted to go to Reno, Nevada, where they advertised themselves as the divorce capital of the world. This is because they had an expedited divorce system that after only 6 weeks of residency, they could rubber stamp a divorce in minutes. Fortunately, Barbara had the means and wherewithal to establish residency in Reno. In March of 1931, she announced through the newspaper that she intended to establish residency in Reno for the purpose of initiating a divorce. The firstborn son of Kenneth Richard Glaze, recalled in a 1999 interview that Barbara gave the ranch to his father after the divorce in 1932. But according to his recollection, his father lost the land 1 year later to what he called fraud paperwork by Colorado Springs lawyers. His last recollection of Barbara was that she was living off Highway 115 with a new lover, Bob Ford. He went on to say that they may or may not have been married, which I can only imagine added fuel to the townfolk's gossip and Manhattan-based scandal. However, it seems the fraudulent paperwork that Kenneth R. Glaze recalled was legitimate. This is because shortly after the divorce, Barbara Glaze sold the ranch to Jim Luthi on October 22, 1932, meaning Kenneth W. Glaze would have been evicted from the land. During that same year, an unlikely friendship was started between Barbara and a young lady named Cleota Dunbar Bell. The friendship blossomed rapidly and added to the townfolk's speculation that Barbara was a homosexual. To add to the evolving town scandal, Cleota was only 18 years old and Barbara was 32, literally twice Cleota's age. They were not formally introduced until Barbara moved to Canyon City and began to shop at the Canyon City drugstore, where Cleota worked as a clerk. Barbara had become a regular at the store after having purchased a home on the corner of 7th and Main in Canyon City. Cleota recalled Barbara pulling up to the drugstore in her Rolls-Royce, being freshly divorced and being the talk of the town. On December 28, 1932, Cleota was married to a man named George Bell, and her friendship with Barbara faded as time came to pass. Little was heard of Barbara Glaze in Guffey or Canyon City after this. She did resurface for a time in Denver, Colorado. She was remarried, and Barbara's father kept his word and disowned her. Unfortunately, she was last seen in 1935 driving a beer truck in Denver. 31 Mile Ranch found its way into the hands of a man named John Robbins, who owned the ranch for much of the 1940s. He held parties for school children in the barn. In a 1998 interview, one of the students, Rose Mae White, talked about her times on the ranch as a 6-year-old who attended his parties. She mentioned a time when a friend of hers fell from a horse and broke her pelvis. Shortly after this incident, the ranch was sold, for a time, to a gentleman named Louis Greer. It was during his tenure on the land where we lost the home built by Barbara. Later, in 1950, the ranch was acquired by Wilbur and Lorraine Sigler. They purchased 3,000 acres for $10 per acre. This purchase equates to $335,000 in today's currency, which, even with that lens on, is a particularly good deal. The 5-bedroom log building that was built by the original settlers served as a temporary bunkhouse for the Siglers. It remained this way for a decade until in 1960, when Wilbur Sigler had the existing and modern house built by a man named Mr. Lafferty. The house features a stately yet rugged fireplace that was handcrafted with local fieldstones by a gentleman named Wilbur Earnhardt. The home is built with the traditional tongue and groove log cabin style, and the timber came from the nearby town of Howard, Colorado. The home was powered by a modest 110-volt generator that sat in a shed behind it. It was supplied water by a spring that sat just a quarter mile up Paris Creek, which can be viewed out the home's front window. 3 years later, Wilbur commissioned local men, Bob and Don Ackerman, to construct the pond outside the front door of the cabin, setting the tone for a picturesque mountain retreat that remains in place to this day. Wilbur and Lorraine lived in the house during the summer months where they raised cattle. During the winter months, the home and ranch were left to the elements as the Siglers returned to their permanent home in Boone, Colorado. The couple sold the land in 1977 and continued to lease the ranch until 1989. Eventually, 31 Mile Ranch and its surrounding lands were acquired by the Bureau of Land Management, where it remained for 7 years until in late 1999 when Mr. R.W. Reynolds, or Curly as he was known, acquired the property through a land swap with the Bureau of Land Management. Upon receiving a grant from the State Historical Fund in 2000 and providing a 50% cash match, he undertook a majority of the repair and restoration work on the barn, the windmill, and the log cabin. The exterior cladding of the barn was repaired. New wood shingles were installed on the barn and cabin. The windmill was repaired by replacing a single blade. Additional labor was provided by the Park County Historical Society, which gave considerable effort to this project. Today, the home, bunkhouse, and surrounding property is a rental location, popular with hikers, photographers, wildlife enthusiasts, and people who are looking to escape the busyness of their day-to-day. The landscape, combined with the old-world charm, makes 31 Mile Ranch one of the most authentic Colorado experiences you can have. If you're looking to step back in time and get away from it all, I highly recommend booking a trip to 31 Mile Ranch. You can find information on how to book your mountain getaway using the links below. I really do appreciate you spending some time with us today. Please take a moment more to like, comment, and subscribe.